Hello, incredibly wonderful AP Psychology students. This is Unit 5 Cognitive Development, and we are in Module 37, which is the Introduction to Intelligence. And I am going to tell you right now, this is the time to open up your slide deck for Module 37. And I am going to wait for you to do that. Okay, I think I waited long enough. All right. And feel free to fast forward through this part. Okay, so we are going to be talking about intelligence, testing and individual differences. And we are going to define intelligence. We are going to look at some of the theories of intelligence, and then we're going to look at another component called emotional intelligence. These are the slide deck terms from Module 37. And there is actually a mistake in the slide deck terms. And maybe this will be some level of an emotional intelligence kind of little quiz for you. If you can figure out what the mistake is with the Module 37 terms versus the Module 38. And that will kind of show a level of conscientiousness that you may have, and that I may not have if I didn't pick up on it initially when I made the slide deck terms. All right, so moving on. All right, so let's talk about what does it mean to be intelligent. It's defined as whatever an intelligence test measures. So tends to be school smarts. We tend to look at it a lot of times when it comes to that, how quickly you're processing things. But it's not like height or weight, which has the same meaning to every person worldwide. So different cultures, different countries might have different skills that are kind of assessing someone's level of intelligence. So I took an IQ test and the results were negative. Little IQ humor there. But actually makes a valid point. I think a lot of us might feel a level of anxiety when we're thinking of our intelligence being measured. So don't you worry, we won't be having to do intelligence tests in class, but you absolutely may want to look at some sample questions of intelligence tests. So as we mentioned, intelligence can be assessed differently depending upon the country or the culture. Here's an example. In Cameroon's equatorial forest, intelligence may reflect understanding of medicinal qualities of local plants. So that's interesting. I would actually like to know that as well. How do we define intelligence? This is the ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new situations. So it kind of sounds like learning, but it's recognizing what is your capacity with that learning, how quickly, and what are your skills. Some people have talents in science, others excel in humanities, and others are gifted in athletics, art. So we might actually call that multiple intelligences, and that happens to be one of the theories that we're going to be talking about today. This topic is very, there's a lot to debate and discuss, and there's definitely different opinions and positions and different forms of evidence to support that position. So I want you in your own decision-making, like which theory do you support the most? So we often think of intelligence with what we call G, which is general intelligence. And that is like where you take all of the mental abilities, and it's kind of all assessed and you're given like an overall general score. So it's kind of bringing all of the possible skill sets together. It's at the heart of all intelligent behavior, from navigating from C to excelling in school. Spearman, so he is one, Charles Spearman's the one that actually created the G scale, or the general intelligence. And that that if you score high in one area, he noticed that people were generally scoring high in other areas. And so that's why you just called that an overall general intelligence. All right. So he did it through something called factor analysis, and we're going to be seeing factor analysis in this unit a little bit. We also will see it in personality, because when we're assessing people's personality types, and also even looking at measuring people's levels of mental health and with psychological disorders, we may use factor analysis as well. So it's a statistical procedure that identifies clusters of related items called factors on a test to identify different dimensions. So it's like to look at different dimensions of intelligence. So we notice that certain types of traits might fall into one dimension. All right. So here's an example. With general intelligence, some of the dimensions would be working memory, spatial processing, quantitative reasoning, knowledge, fluid reasoning. And you don't have to know what all of those are right now, but just knowing that there's these different traits that fall under what would be classified as visual spatial processing. And that's all part of this factor analysis. All right, so there was another researcher, his name is L.L. Thurston, and he did contradict and support some of his findings. So he, early opponents, he gave 56 different tests to people and mathematically identified 7 clusters of primary mental abilities, which was much greater number than just giving an overall general intelligence. He had word fluency, verbal comprehension, spatial ability, perceptual speed, numerical ability, inductive reasoning, and memory. And as we mentioned, you don't have to memorize all the different abilities that he identified, but just knowing that it was much larger number than overall just clustering it as one large general intelligence. So Thurston did not rank people on a single scale, but when the other investigators studied these profiles, they detected a persistent tendency. Those who excelled in one of the 7 clusters generally scored well in the other. So it kind of goes back to what we were saying, is that if you do well in one particular area that, like Thurston may have said, like inductive reasoning, that you would tend to do well in other areas, which would be like spatial reasoning. So it's kind of arguing against Thurston's theory. There is another theory, Howard Gardner. He believed that there are 8 relatively independent intelligences, including the verbal and mathematical aptitudes assessed by standardized tests. So this one is a pretty well recognized theory. A lot of schools will kind of use Howard Gardner's theory when it comes to just how to work with students individually. Sometimes they'll even reference like learning styles. So intelligence takes many forms. So depending upon maybe like certain careers or interests that you have in certain subject areas, that could also be a little bit of an indicator of which intelligence. Let's look at them. All right, so like I said, you don't necessarily have to memorize all of these intelligence, but you want to just identify them and see them as part of Gardner's theory. Musical, all right, ability to produce and understand pitch and tempo, rhythm. There's visual spatial ability, which is to be able to think in images and pictures. Kind of think of yourself when we're talking about these, like which ones do you tend to have more of a strength? Logical, mathematical, which you can think abstractly and see patterns in math, like are you good at math? Bodily kinesthetic, that is like physical movement, handling objects, but also like fine motor skills. We also would certainly think of athletes falling into that category. interpersonal, the ability to work with and understand others emotionally and socially. If you tend to be, your friend's counselor, that would be, or you like to, work with groups and be with people, you're very kind of social, that might be a little bit more of an interpersonal skill. Verbal linguistic, that is to be able to understand word meanings and sounds. All right, so we see here naturalistic, linguistic, visual spatial, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, logical, kinesthetic. All right, so these are some of the examples that we have for Gardner, but these are not all 8. The other slides, so originally they talked about 6 of them, but this is the full 8. So I guess I need to go back for a second. When we look at a couple others, the naturalistic, that's where you are just more into to understand the natural world. So they say here more like a biologist, conservationist. And then the other one, we mentioned that there was interpersonal, but there's intrapersonal, which is the ability to understand one inner feeling and have self-realization. So it's really understanding and being reflective and understanding yourself. All right, and this slide gives you some other examples of like careers and people that might be in that particular field of study. All right. Okay, so when talking about intelligence, there is something called savant syndrome, and that is a condition which a person otherwise limited in mental ability has an exceptional special skill, such as computation or drawing. So on certain intelligence tests, they might score low, and maybe even taking the general IQ test, they might score low, but then in other areas, they are incredibly advanced and artistic and talented. Sometimes we do find people that have autism might have some level of savant syndrome. So this is an example. His name is Kim Peek. There is a movie called The Rain Man, and actually came out a long time ago, but it is a great movie. I highly recommend seeing it. But this is the real story. His name is, like I said, his name's Kim Peek. And, on a general intelligence, they actually thought that he had, in some cases, the way he was testing, that he had a level of Down syndrome, but he is incredibly intelligent and smart and has a photographic memory for many different things. So I'm not going to show this, but I want you, if you can, go back to these slides and play it. And I think we'll try to show it in class as well. All right, and here's another example, a brief helicopter ride over Singapore, followed by 5 days of drawing. An artist, Stephen Wiltshire, accurately reproduced an aerial view of the city with his memory. And you can already kind of see those details. Look at that, right? That is clearly an example of savant syndrome. Or actually, let me take it back. He might not even really have savant syndrome, but yet he has got a true genius when it comes to being able to reproduce something from his memory that he's experienced or seen. All right, Victor is blind, unable to speak, understands very few words. However, he is able to hear a piece of music once and play it back flawlessly on the piano. Which abilities best represent? And you are correct. C, savant syndrome. All right, so there's another theory. It's Robert Sternberg. He agrees with Gardner that there's more than just the traditional general intelligence, but he actually focused on 3. He called it the triarchic theory, which is analytical, creative, and practical intelligence. So let's look at examples of those. So analytical is academic problem solving with intelligence tests, and that would be more of what you would think of the traditional intelligence test. And creative intelligence is innovative smarts, adapting to new situations, novel situations. You know, what we talked about with what are some of the components and traits of being creative. And last but not least is practical intelligence for everyday tasks that may be poorly defined and have multiple solutions. The intelligence test that asks a person how many uses they can think of for a golf ball is most likely testing a person's. All right, so we would say creative intelligence, right? So, yep. All right. So research factor analysis confirms there is a general intelligence, and it predicts performance on various complex tasks and various jobs. And extremely high cognitive ability scores predict exceptional achievements, such as doctoral degrees and publications. So there is a correlation. There truly is, through a lot of testing, that if you are consistently scoring high in general intelligence on IQ tests, and we'll talk about IQ tests more specifically in the next module, that it is definitely correlated with having higher degrees and levels of education, and yeah, and exceptional achievements in academic areas. You're going to skip over that for now. All right, so, well, actually, we're gonna, I guess we'll talk about it a little bit. So they did actually do a longitudinal study of youth across 25 years, and intelligence scores correlated with a moderate positive correlation with their later income. So now they said moderate, it's a 0.30. So as we talk, so we mean positive correlation. So intelligence scores and income level, they're both going in the same direction, right? As your intelligence score is higher, the likelihood of your income increases as well. Remember, we call that a positive correlation, going in the same direction. But it's moderate. It's certainly not a strong correlation. So what is the difference? Why is it that if you score really high on intelligence, you just don't automatically make more money? What are some of the other factors that would certainly make it so we cannot show, say one causes the other? High intelligence causes you to have, academic and financial success. There's something else called grit. And grit is the passion and perseverance in the pursuit of long-term goals. So it's not just your intelligence. Your intelligence helps you, but you have to have other levels of, when it comes to work ethic, being conscientious, being energetic, enthusiastic. Those are other components and traits that we definitely correlate, there's a much stronger, higher correlation with grit. So here's a good little quote. Grit is sticking with your future day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for the year, for years. So just stick with it, right? Keep persevering. You can do this, and just know that you're going to fail along the way. It's part of the process. All right. So how do nature and nurture combine to produce success? A common ingredient of expert performance in chess, dance, sports, computer programming, music, and medicine is about 10 years of intense daily practice. They sometimes talk about it like 10,000, right? That you have to, whether it's 10 years or it's 10,000 hours, they talk about these different components. But the key is that you just have to keep working at it and working at it hard, creating a pattern and part of your daily, experiences to really master something. I know you guys all want to become master studiers. So when you get to college, right? So that would incorporating those daily patterns and experiences of working on it every day, improving upon your study skills, improving upon your attention, improving upon, staying on task, and staying focused. So becoming a professional musician or elite athlete requires first native ability. So yeah, there's going to be some ability that you need to have in certain areas. So as hard as you work at maybe trying to be, or for me to work at being a professional basketball player, there's some level, it's just not going to work for me. But you also, even if you do have some of that, what we would call native ability, some natural talent, there's going to be those 11,000 hours, sorry, not 10,000 hours on average of practice that you're going to need to have. All right, so last thing we're going to talk about is something called emotional intelligence, one of my favorite things to talk about. I can hardly do a little activity in class that I'm going to tell you about, surprise. It's the ability to perceive, understand, and manage and use emotions. So in addition to having grit, in addition to, yes, maybe having some native talent in certain areas and certain abilities, whether it's, kinesthetic or spatial, skills, you also need to have some level of emotional intelligence. And they have explored our social intelligence, the know-how involved in understanding social situations, managing ourselves successfully. It's a critical part. So what is that? Perceiving emotions. So we need to be able to perceive other people and how they're feeling, right? So recognizing faces, music, stories, and identifying one's own emotions as well. So you need to recognize others and what they're feeling, and then also be more reflective of what you're feeling and knowing your own emotions and understanding them. So not only do you recognize them and perceive, but you can make predictions. And then it's not just, you got to manage it. You need to know how to express in appropriate ways and knowing that it could be different in different situations. And then you need to use those emotions to facilitate adaptive or creative thinking. So it's a level of self-awareness, social awareness, managing your relationships in a healthy way, right? Having your self-management and managing that. And then it's all going to be some level of interconnectedness. All right, what are characteristics of emotionally intelligent people? More often succeed in relationship, career, and parenting situations than do academically smarter but less emotionally intelligent people. So they tend to be happy and healthy. They can delay gratification in pursuit of long-range rewards. All right, so that's one other last component I would think we should talk about is delayed gratification. What does that mean? That means that you can sometimes work at, recognize there's a certain level of perseverance and for lack of a better word right now, suffering that you're going to need to take now for the long-term goal. So for example, if you are choosing whatever that long-term goal is, maybe it's to go to college, maybe it's a particular trade that you're extremely interested in, that there's going to be a lot that you're going to have to work through when it comes to training and taking classes and practicing, that is going to be involved for you to get to that long-term goal. All right, and delaying your gratification, not just immediately needing a response or immediately needing a reward now, that you know that it's not necessarily going to come now, it's going to come later. All right, so these are the theories. You definitely want to spend time going through this. This is a really good graphic organizer to let you know what are the strengths, but what are some of the critiques and other considerations, right? I will say there are people today that still follow one theory versus the other a little more. So there is a lot to debate and discuss about this. And I think that's it. All right, take care. Remember, all of you are intelligent. Yes, you are. All right. Have a good day. Bye.